Hi, this is Antandra, and today I'm going to be talking about Massive X from Native Instruments. This is a brand new synth that just came out recently. And first off, you have this drop-down menu, so you have different sizes here, so you can make it larger for larger screens or smaller. You can rescan your presets here, turn off the usage tracking or leave it on, and go to your presets folder, so you could rename, delete, or reorganize your presets. And so we'll just show that real quick. And then you can also, to the right of that, browse through the presets. So there's quite a few good ones in different categories here. And you can also click on user, and that's your presets, whatever you save. And you can browse through pages using those little pill buttons at the bottom. So you can also browse through using the up and down arrows here. And under Quick Start, you'll find the initial presets and some other basic templates and starting places. So the Massive X blank is a good one if you want to get in there and do the routing yourself, because it's not all pre-routed like the default initial preset. But we'll get into that a bit later. So you also have this save button, and if you give something a name that already exists, like it'll warn you that you're going to overwrite it before you save it. So you can just start changing the name until you find something available. So that's a nice feature. And then you have this volume slider to the right of that, so you can turn it up or down, moving left to right or up and down. They just recently released an update for 1.0.1 that fixed an issue with that, because before you couldn't move it left and right, even though it kind of looks like you can. Then underneath that, you have this row with pitch bend, the mod wheel, which you can assign just by clicking and dragging on these, and or just clicking and clicking on the square you want to assign it to, and then you can adjust the range. If I remove that, I can also just click right on a control, and then it controls it completely. So it just depends what you're going for. If I right click, I can remove the mapping. So you have aftertouch there, so on the push we have aftertouch, and if I press a key and then start adding pressure on the key, you'll see the aftertouch begin to light up. So watch this. There you go. So if I were to map the aftertouch to, say, the frequency, that's really fun. Then you have 16 different macros, and in the initial default preset, the first 8 are auto-mapped, but in the blank one they're not. You can also delete those mappings and change them to whatever you want, and if you double click you can rename these. However, you do have these 8 available here, and then you have this global section, so you have the global pitch and the modulation amounts for that, and then you have the glide toggle, which is affected by the time here. So with a low time with the glide on, you're gonna barely notice it if I play between octaves. Let me crank up the filter. But if I turn this glide time up, and there's some additional options for that in the voicing tab down here. We'll get into that when we get into this voicing section. So then in this oscillator section, you have a bunch of different wavetables that you can select for 2 different oscillators, 1 and 2, and you can turn those on and off by clicking on those. And you can also browse through with the arrows here. And you have fine control, or actually this is the modulation amount, so if I were to drag a modulator on there, then that lights up and that shows you the modulation amount of this pitch. So if I were to modulate it 12 semitones, it's just being modulated with this one, which is hardwired to the amp envelope. It controls the overall volume of the synth, but you have all these other open slots that you can change to whatever you want, but we'll get into that in a minute. So that's how the modulation works there. Then you have the different modes here. Standard is the default mode. You can also play it in reverse. So if I choose a basic shape like a saw wave, we'll be able to see the pattern. Let me go ahead and move it to a saw position. So that's in backward mode, and forward mode would be as shown here. Now it's ramping up. And you can change the polarity as well, so that inverts the phase. And you can turn the init off. And then moving this will actually move the level, but you can get some very subtle harmonics or more noticeable ones if you have the right shapes. And quite interesting stuff can happen just from moving that with the init off. So we'll turn that back on now. So you have some really classic ones in here from the original Massive X under that remastered section, and then you have a bunch of new ones. As of today, you can't import your own, August 18th, 2019, but maybe they'll add it at some point. I'm still happy with it either way. It's a really versatile synth, so if they get it to the point where you can import your own and it sounds of this quality, then I'm all for it. So yeah, we have a lot of different shapes here. And then you have this filter, which I believe is like an additive roll-off filter. So rather than a subtractive filter that's going to roll off the wave, it's going to mathematically reduce the harmonics from the source in an additive kind of way. That's my guess. There's no manual for this section as of yet that I've found, but they are releasing different manuals on the site for different sections, so I've been reading in there a bit and learning some things that I didn't know. But people were saying that Massive X aliases, which isn't true. There's actually a video by Echo Soundworks that illustrates really clearly with demonstrations exactly what aliasing looks like, and how the harmonics people are saying is aliasing is actually just in the harmonic series, so it's not like random noise. And I'll link that video in the description for Echo Soundworks' more in-depth explanation. So aside from that, let's go ahead and move on. We've got the noise oscillators. And you can actually route these dedicated phase modulation oscillators into these as well. And if I go into voicing and I turn on reset, now it'll be the same every time I press a note. Whereas with that on free run, it's going to be jumping all over the place. So just depends on the type of sound you're making. But so we have these noise oscillators. There's two of them, and there's quite a few different noises you can change between with the arrows here. We're just clicking on them, and we can listen to some of those. So you have the pitch bend there, and quite a bit of flexibility. I found a folder that has the actual wave files for this in my file structure, but yeah, I haven't found out how to add my own because just putting files in there didn't make them appear inside the synth. So if anyone has an extra trick they'd like to share with how to get wave files to appear in there, let me know. But it's pretty cool nonetheless. Next up we have the filter. So there's all these different filters that have sub-filter selections. And you have the FM on the filter, which is really cool. We'll get more into that in the routing section. But you can basically just route anything into it and then frequency modulate the filter. Not all the filters have that, but some of them do. And you have some really great filtering options. Like the combs are great, and you have several different options. Then you have the creak filter, which is kind of like the new scream. If you're familiar with the original Massive. So you have this driven version, snarl, nosy, and oor. And then you have, yeah, there's just a ton of filters because each one of these has a bunch of sub-selections, and so don't get fooled into thinking that you don't have a lot of options. And then you have all these insert effects, and you have 3 different slots for those. So you have this anima, bit crusher, utility, which means you have these even more filters. They're just more like utility filters that are just for like balancing and cleaning up the sound. And then you have this folder, different modes. And then you have the frequency shifter. So this sounds really good with a oscillator going with a consistent sound like this sine to saw. So that's a lot of fun. You can turn off wide mode. Reminiscent of the original Massive. And then you have this distortion. Some different algorithms for that. Or modes, I should say. And then you have the oscillator here. So you can actually have an oscillator anywhere in your signal path, and you could route it differently through the next section or whatever you want. So to the right of these insert effects, well, actually we have a few more. The pulse or the phase modulation oscillator, and then we have the ring modulation. I'm just going to fly through these. Ring modulation. And then you have the sample and hold effect. And then you have this track delay. some different settings here. So yeah, that's the insert effects. And as you can see, you can get in here and route those however you want, because you have A, B, and C here, and you have A, B, and C here. And then you have X, Y, and Z, which are the stereo effects, and they're right here. And you have 3 different algorithms or routings for those. So by default, X goes into Y, and that goes into Z. So it's all in serial, but you can also do X and Y going into Z in parallel, or X and Y and Z all in parallel. So experiment with those and you can get some cool stuff going on, like you can even make drum beats by routing like a kick into the first one, making the second one into a snare and the third one into hats. So I can show you an example where I've done that in my user presets here. I can pull up this one. So yeah, right here you can see that I've done that exact thing, just kind of routed them through different effects, different chains all together. And then I'm just kind of using these performers to go crazy, creating different patterns. So you can get really intricate. And so let's go back to the initial preset. So in these stereo effects, you have a dimension expander, an equalizer, flanger, a nonlinear lab, which is like simulates different speakers and amps and stuff. You have this phaser and this quad chorus, and you have reverb, and you don't just have one, you have like a bunch of different reverbs here, different algorithms. And they sound really great in my opinion. I love the reverbs, so I wanted to show that. And then you have this delay. You can also turn on sync, and then you have, now by default these are all 1/16 notes, but you can go in here and edit each setting that you change it to, so that you could have it like alternate or change speed to very specific rates. And then you have this flutter and the send amount, the feedback amount, mix, so the dry wet, and then you have this color here. So just kind of filters the delay out, and the flutter just kind of adds a bit of like analog kind of texture randomness, changing of the time. Whereas if that's down, it's going to be more predictable, robotic even. But yeah, that's the delay for you. We have the stereo expander. And yeah, the quad chorus, I didn't cover all these, but what's cool is that there's just all these different sub selections for each of these, so they really went all in with the effects and made them really quality. you have this feedback knob here on the amp, which is really fun. I didn't even talk about that, but if you go in the routing, by default the initial preset sends the feedback through the filter, but you can actually feedback whatever you want and get some pretty interesting or unpredictable results. Just by turning up that amp feedback. So that pretty well covers this top section. Now the bottom section has this voice and routing, and then you have the 3 performers, which we touched on, and then there's the 3 envelopes here, 3 LFOs here, and then another envelope and 2 more LFOs. But these are all interchangeable between the 4 different options as far as envelopes and LFOs, except for number 1, which is hard-coded to the amp envelope. And then you have key tracking, so you have 4 different key tracking modulations, and you can actually control those from the note pitch value. So different values would have different modulations. If I start moving this around and map it to something, and go ahead and adjust the range. So I could reverse that and make it so that like lower notes go up in frequency and higher notes have a lower frequency. So you can also do stuff with the velocity on off. So I can make it so hitting the key lightly makes the filter closed. And if I hit the key hard, plays louder. A lot of fun and possibilities there with mappings to give things some more organic feel. You have some nice tools down here to draw and manipulate the shapes. So this one you can just kind of draw steps, but you can also go and like modulate the whole step pattern with that, and then you can go in here and draw steps, and it's really in depth, this editor, and you can click here and add points. You can also move them around by the bottom piece like this, much like you can with the performer. So you have a lot of different options in the performer, which we'll get into. So you can kind of freeform draw with this one. You can move around points and create new points just by clicking. You can also create steps, or you can have like this ramp down effect and a ramp up. And then you have this triangle pattern. So if I zoom in, you'll see more triangles. And if I switch this to bipolar, then you can see it starts from the middle. You also have this sine wave, and you can get some really cool stuff going on with all this. So if I select all of these by clicking in the top and dragging across, I can also shift them using this, clicking and dragging up and down, or this to shift and drag from the sides logarithmically. And you can see the grid shifting down here. You can also click on that and drag it up and down and left and right from right here. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you create your patterns. You can use note steps, note lengths as well. Or you can go here into custom and choose different bar lengths and different beat lengths, or different numbers of beats per bar and lengths of those beats in sixteenths. So if you double click on those, they all go to 4. You can basically make your own time signatures or fancy subdivisions and patterns. So I could go in here, select some subdivisions like so, and now if I start to draw a pattern, it's going to be in those divisions. So you can quickly draw some really elaborate modulations. And it's one of my favorite parts of Massive X, because you can also switch between those modulations using the performer, and by default the C0 to C1 keys on your MIDI controller. So for example, I could play a note here, and if I go over to the routing and I map this to, say, the frequency, now you'll notice that when I press new keys it doesn't restart, but if I press key here, restarts every time. Now, why would you want remote? Well, the reason for remote is that when it's on remote and you're switching between patterns by pressing this lower octave, then you're going to be able to switch between them while key's held down. Where if it's on key, you have to press a new key before it'll switch to the new pattern that you've selected. So let me give an example. Right here, I'm just going to play, well actually I'm going to draw another pattern in this section B. Maybe I'll just like adjust this rhythm a bit. Okay, so we have a new pattern, and now I can switch between them. So you see there, I can switch while holding the key, but if I was in key mode and I was holding the key, well, it's hard to tell because those patterns are similar. Let me make them a little more different. So if I just have this one kind of ramp up, we'll notice more. See, it doesn't change when I hit the new key, whereas if it's on remote, so the performer is super fun. So you have 12 different slots and 3 different patterns per slot, and they can all be moving at different rates and have different lengths, and you can really get some elaborate patterns. You can have it in loop mode, which it is by default, or just one-shot mode. So when people say the envelopes can't be clicked and dragged around, while that's true, you can also get in here, drag these around and map them to whatever you would normally map an envelope to, and you can see the playhead moving along to it. And so it's just about getting creative with the tools you have. I don't like to think of synths in a competitive way, rather a creative way where each one has its unique character and they all bring something to the table. It's just about how you want to use them and get creative with them. So I love the performers. So we can get more into the modulators here, but maybe the best way to do that would be to make a new sound from scratch. So I'm just going to start a blank preset, and we're also going to cover the voicing section and the routing here. So the voicing section is polyphonic by default. I can switch it to monophonic, or I can leave it on polyphonic. The difference being polyphonic, you could play chords. We won't hear anything until I route something to the output, but I can play a chord here. Whereas if it's monophonic, it's just going to be one note at a time. So Triller allows you to trill between notes, whereas if that's off, you can't do that. So you'll hear a lot of flute players trilling and that sort of thing. So that's what that does. Then you have the trigger mode. So when it's set to legato, it won't re-trigger the envelopes if you're holding down a note and you press another note. Whereas if it's off, it'll re-trigger the envelopes every time you press a note, even if you were holding a note. So to give an example, let me just go ahead and drag one of these performers onto the global pitch, and we'll go ahead and draw a little ramp down here. And we'll start it with the key. And so now, if I were to go ahead and turn this to, turn the legato off. It just spins whenever I press a note. Whereas if I put legato on, it just spins with the initial note. So that's how that works. And then you have this transpose, which goes up or down 24 semitones, in addition to this global pitch and the pitch on all the oscillators. So it just gives you more control. And then you have this global pitch bend amount, so that can go up really high, up to 96, or down minus 96. And you have this whole glide section here, so you can change between the glide shapes. So if I turn glide on, and let's go ahead and tighten up this envelope so that so now we're just hearing the glide when I press between notes. And I have to hold the note, whereas if this is off, this legato, it'll glide every time. Whereas if it's on, so it's kind of like the always switch in Serum. So then you have this linear mode, or you have the exponential, or the inverted exponential, just to give it some like easing in or out. And so yeah, that's that section. Then if you want to reset the oscillators and envelopes and stuff, you'd use this, which would give it more of a consistent sound every time you press a key. So if I turn on unison and give us a bunch of voices, so up to 6 here, the max, you can hear that it's pretty like random every time I press a key if I have it free running. Whereas if I have reset all, it's more consistent. Or you can just reset the oscillators. And then you can change the phase here in the spread. So it's just about finding the sweet spot. You also have the noise phase here. So if I were to route the noise out, you can hear that. And if I change the PM here and route that in to oscillator 1, you get some crazy sounds. But I could also say route the noise into the PM auxiliary, and then you have this auxiliary knob, and you can use the noises to modulate the phase, and then you can modulate like the noise phase right here, and these are mappable as well. And you can have the noise restart every time you press a key, or not, depending on what you want. So if I found like a sound that has some length to it, or if that's off, just starts whenever because it's already free running in the background. So then you have this unison section, so you can go up to 6 voices. You can turn on scale, and this will make it so every key you press will be in whatever scale is selected here. So these are chords down here, but you actually have the scales up here, so probably have to be selecting a scale. So definitely a lot of fun to experiment with routing stuff, and I especially like this phase modulation auxiliary, being able to route stuff into that. Like for example, I can take this LFO, go to the random LFO, and let's go ahead and map that over here in the routing section to this mod 1, and then I can route that to the phase modulation. And so now I have this being routed into that. Then I could turn on this audio noise, and we get some really high-pitched kind of audio rate stuff. I could slow this rate down. Get some really weird stuff. So it's just about exploring and trying to come up with new, interesting ways to route things and sounds that please you. So get some nice bleeps and bloops out of it. But yeah, the routing is really powerful. You can even just route this directly to the output and hear exactly what that would sound like. You can see it there even. And now if I were to speed this up, can turn down the jitter, change the shape. So that's more of like a square wave random LFO. And then if you have the jitter, you can also adjust this threshold, so it's going to affect how the jitter works. So definitely really fun. Let's go ahead and add some effects on here in the filter. So we actually have to route stuff into it. But I could route the filter into this distortion and then go through these other chains and then out and get rid of this connection. Pretty cool, squelchy stuff. And then I can go ahead and add some like track delay. think that pretty well covers it for this video. So hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, I'm Antandra. Peace.